did you want?
Just go ahead and start with your bio, Bill.
Okay.
Short bio.
My name is Bill Shishima, and what, you want a short bio of myself?
Yes.
Okay, I was born here in downtown Los Angeles, where Los Angeles was born, but 80 years later. So I was born in 1930 in actually downtown Los Angeles, or Mexican town. My dad had in Mercado Plaza, a Mexican grocery store, and I believe my mom spoke more Spanish than English, because at least that brought in some money. And then I went to a Japanese private school over here by Little Tokyo, and then the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the infamous date of December 7th, 1941. That's when we were incarcerated into the camps. You want me to go into more detail about that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we were ordered by Exclusion Order 33, which says that basically we had to report. It was dated May the 3rd, 1942, and we had to report to the local church on May the 9th, 1942. So after arriving at the Union Church here in Little Tokyo, we boarded buses to Arcadia, California. Arcadia, California was home to the Santa Anita horse race track. My family was fortunate. We lived on the parking lot of Santa Anita horse race track. I say fortunate because my grandparents lived in the horse stables. And as much as I love my grandparents, I hated to go visit them, especially in the early morning when the ground started to warm up and have the stench of the prior tenants, the horses. We stayed there in Santa Anita, so-called Assembly Center, for about 5 months until they could make the more permanent camps. They had 10 of these camps. We elected to call it America's concentration camp. By definition, a concentration camp says where they kept prisoners of war under guards, and we were classified as enemy alien. Although I was a young American citizen of 11 years old, we were classified as enemy aliens and incarcerated in one of 10 America's concentration camps. 10 camps varied from population from 7,000 to 19,000, and we were incarcerated in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. In Heart Mountain, Wyoming, way back in 1942, we were the largest, third largest city in Wyoming, population 10,000. So, would you like a little bit about camp life there?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Okay. Basically, we were fortunate. We had our own Boy Scout district there. We had 7 Boy Scout troops that really kept us busy and active. So we had patrol meetings once a week. We had troop meetings once a week. And we even had our own Boy Scout softball league and our own Boy Scout basketball league. So we were really kept busy doing scouting activities. So we learned the Boy Scout motto, be prepared, the Scout oath and law. We learned scouting activities such as cooking, camping, fire building, leadership. So Boy Scouts really kept us busy throughout camp life, and we were able to meet other boys and girls throughout the camp, not only our school classmates or our block classmates, but we learned to have friends throughout the camp. So we had friends throughout the 10,000 people in Heart Mountain. So we had regular schools, and initially we had classes in the barracks. In the barracks, we just had benches for our chairs, and so it was very uncomfortable the first winter of 1942. But by 1943, we had a new high school there, so we really were fortunate, and we had regular classes at the junior, senior high school in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. So we had regular teachers. We didn't have enough credentialed Japanese American teachers, so we had to recruit from Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado. So we had Caucasian teacher come in and help us in our high school programs there.
Okay.
Okay, do you have any specific questions about camp life?
Were you guarded by like American guards around the camps, like American military?
Yes.
How did they treat you?
We weren't supposed to socialize with them.
Mm-hmm.
We had about 109 MPs, military police, in the camps. We had around 6 guard towers surrounding the camps with barbed wire fence. The first year, they were strict on that, but by the second year, we did not see the soldiers other than the main gate. So we couldn't walk out the main gate, but we could go out under the fences, other side of camp. So we were able to do some hiking or play with our homemade sleds and toboggan on the hillside. So after the first year, there wasn't too much regulation as far as the soldiers were concerned, other than we can walk out to the main gate.
Okay. Also, I was wondering too, was your camps, you said life was like pretty good because you kept busy. Was it like that for the other camps too, or were you very fortunate where you were located?
I believe Heart Mountain was exceptional because we happened to have the Boy Scout leaders from prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Many of them came into Heart Mountain. So we were fortunate that we had organized troops. As I mentioned, we had 7 troops. We even had a German Bugle Corps. They were able to bring in the equipment from Little Tokyo into Heart Mountain, Wyoming. So we had a Camp German Bugle Corps. So it really kept us focused together in the scouting program. So I think we had less teenage delinquency in our Heart Mountain camp because we were kept busy with the Boy Scout program. And they also had large Girl Scout programs. We had the Girl Scouts and the Brownies and the Girl Scouts. So it really kept us busy.
Okay, that's actually really interesting. Also, how were you treated after you left the camps? You were allowed to return back to your normal lives. What was the change like?
Okay, it was a big change for me because prior to going into the camps in World War II, I went to a Japanese parochial school. So it was basically all Japanese American students. And camp was all Japanese Americans. So when I came out of camp, first time I had classes with the Caucasians. But it worked out pretty good. I was maybe above average in athletics, so with PE classes, I was one of the few that were selected at the beginning. So there was no prejudice in the PE classes. But one day I was coming home from school. I was still only 14 years old, and 2 Caucasian girls, maybe around 5 years old, they said, "Oh, hello, man." Wow, I felt good because she called me a man, being a 14-age teenager. But then the other girl stepped in. She says, "No, he's not a man. He's a chap." Oh, I was offended. But yet I couldn't blame the kids. Probably someone taught them that. And I looked different and was considered as a chap.
Were there any other instances where something else like this happened? Or is that like just one you can clearly remember?
That one I clearly remember.
Oh, okay.
Once in a while people said, "Gee, where did I learn to speak English so well?" Well, I was born here in America, so that was my only language. And my parents wanted me to learn English, so I never did learn to speak Japanese.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Also too, what is like your opinion? Why do you think the US didn't like say they were sorry for the internment camps until like the 1980s when this occurred in the 1940s? Like it took 40 years.
Well, initially the laws were against us, meaning the Japanese. Okay, so way back in 1790, only the free whites could become naturalized citizens. Then in the 1870s, the free blacks could become American citizens. So it left out only the Asian groups. Asians weren't eligible to become citizens. In fact, my parents first came to America in 1910, and they weren't eligible to become citizens until after World War II or 1952. So they were here in America 40 years before they were even eligible to become American citizens. So finally, my parents got their citizenship at the local Hollywood Bowl. So they finally were able to own property and vote here in America.
Okay. Were you guys, were the Japanese Americans, like, were you big fan of Ronald Reagan when he became governor? Because when he became president, he was one of the ones who signed the Civil Liberties Act.
But yes and no. I think they had some personal push that Reagan had to be reminded that way back right after World War II, he had to make a presentation to one of the parents here in Orange County. I believe the name was John Masuda. He gave his life fighting for America, and at that time, Orange County says, no, he can't be buried here in Orange County. There was prejudice against him. But then, at that time, Captain Ronald Reagan had to give a talk, and then they permitted Matsuda family to bury him in Orange County. So President Reagan at that time had to be reminded of that incident, that there was prejudice against the Japanese here in Orange County. And since he was reminded of that, he finally signed the bill in 1988, the Civil Liberty Act of 1988.
Okay. And who came up with, like, the premises of the bill? Was it Japanese Americans who were in the camps that came up with the idea to push this act to be signed?
Yes, I would think so, because in the late 70s and early 1980s, the Japanese American Civil Liberty Bill and the local communities start to have talk of reparation for all people incarcerated during World War II. And I think that was the climax of 1988 when President Reagan signed the bill.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Do you think Americans today are ashamed of what happened still? Like, do people, like, not talk about it openly out in California because, like, they're ashamed of what happened?
Yes, to a certain extent, because, hate to say it, but we look different. Just because my parents was raised and born in Japan and came to America, so I'm a young Japanese American citizen. But just because I look Japanese, sometimes I look down upon. People will say, go back where you came from. This is the only country I know. I was born and raised here in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, so do you feel like once we signed the bill and paid reparations, do you think all the Japanese Americans accepted the apology of how they were treated in World War II?
To a certain extent, they accepted the apology, but still, hate to say it, but like President Truman, way back to about 1948, 1949, he commended the 142nd Regimental Combat Team, the most decorated unit in military history, and he told them that they fought two wars, the war in Europe and the war at home of prejudice, and he said we won. That was way back 1948, 49, but I still feel some prejudice because I look different from the average American.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Another question. So in high school, I never really learned about the Japanese American internment camps a lot. Like, they only mentioned, like, maybe 2 paragraphs in the textbook when they talked about World War II. Why do you think this is? Why is it not talked about a lot in the school systems?
Because of the racial prejudice, and even though most Americans didn't know what happened on the Pacific Coast, the interior and the East Coast never heard of the internments of the Japanese during World War II. That's Japanese Americans, I'm saying. Okay?
So yeah, so like since I live on the East Coast, maybe that has something to do with it too.
Yes, because the Japanese in the Midwest and the East Coast were not really affected, other than the West Coast, where there were 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry at the outbreak of World War II. In America at that time, we had close to 130,000 people of Japanese ancestry, but 120 lived on the Pacific coast. So they were the one mainly affected.
Oh, okay. And this probably has to do something with maybe like school systems out in California. Like, do you have like a whole like I don't know like discussion on it like in the school systems about World War II and the internment camps that occurred? Because like I never really did. We just talked about it, like once in college. That was about it.
And well, actually, that's true over here on the West Coast also. It's not too much in our textbook, but it's a little bit more noticeable because of the saturated population here in the West Coast. And you know, way back in 1905, when the Japanese immigrants were coming, the headlines in San Francisco, the port of entry, was "Problem of the Hour: Japanese invasion." They said, "Wow, the Japanese are taking away all the good jobs here on the West Coast, such as farming, mining, railroading, fishing, and even getting daring to open up their own business." So the San Francisco Board of Education were going to segregate the schools, that the Asians cannot go to the regular public schools. But then they protested, and that time was President Theodore Roosevelt. So they came to what we call a gentleman's agreement way back in 1907, 1908. So gentleman's agreement was Japan would not send any more laborers here to America, provided that the San Francisco school board would not segregate the schools. So that was the gentleman's agreement of 1907, 1908.
Okay. Yeah, so probably because of like maybe America doesn't want to admit they have a race problem. I don't know, maybe that could be why they won't mention it a lot in our history classes today about what happened. But I don't know, it's kind of unfortunate, I feel like, 'cause I feel like it's something important that everyone should learn about. And that's kind of like one of the basis for my project of why I wanted to do it, actually.
Well, that's one of the reasons the museum exists.
Mm-hmm.
The museum exists here that they don't want anything to happen to anybody, anywhere, what happened to us during World War II. Just because I look like the enemy, Japanese were incarcerated behind barbed wire fence and armed guards. There are no charges against us, no due process of law. But just because we look like the enemy, we're put behind barbed wire fence and armed guards, and that was it. And actually, America didn't learn its lesson, because on 9/11, 2001, after the terrorists destroyed the Twin Towers and attacked the Pentagon, they said, gee, the tourists look like Arabs or Middle Easterners. So what happened to the American Arabs, American Muslim? People look down upon them just because they look like the terrorists. And there was talk of incarcerating them, like we were incarcerated during World War II, because they looked like the terrorists. So some of them were incarcerated into Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and there weren't charges against them, no due process of law. In fact, there's a handful still incarcerated in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and that happened, 12 years ago?
Yeah.
So America still didn't learn its lesson about that. That's why the museum is here, hoping that never happens to anyone, anywhere again.
Okay, yeah, and you actually just answered my next question, because I was going to relate the Japanese American internment camps to 9/11. So thank you for your response with that. So I guess America has still not really learned their lesson, you would say.
Yes.
Which is kind of sad, I think. Just judging a person by their race, not by getting to know them, but It's what we're guilty of, I think. Is there anything else you want to add to the interview that you think should be known, like about the camps or the treatment of Japanese Americans today?
Well, I think America's learning that the face of Americans are varied. Different colors, skins, different color eyes and hairs, different shapes. So we have Americans of all shapes and all sizes, all colors. So I think some of the Americans have to remember that they all don't look alike.
I think that's very true too, because America is a big melting pot. Like, I have family came over to Ellis Island from Ireland who are potato farmers, and I also have family came over from Albania, which makes me like Irish and Albanian. So technically, I'm made up of different races too. Like, we aren't unless we're Native American, we aren't pure American. That's what I believe, and I learned in school. But
so when I first heard your name, Nako, I believe you spell it Nako.
Yep, that's how I spell it.
I had two family friends named Nako. So I says, well, I hope you're related to them. You're not, even though it's not a popular name in the Japanese community, but I have a couple of Japanese friends that are named Nako.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard that before. It's used as a first name, too. Yep. But yeah, I've been asked by a lot of people if I'm Japanese before. Yeah. Even though I don't think I really look Japanese, but hey.
Well, like I say, they're all changing.
Yep.
Now you do have Japanese American that doesn't look typically an Asian face.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think you covered all my questions that I wanted to ask you. So I just want to thank you very much for doing this interview with me.
And good luck on your project, and I hope you learned something that you didn't know before.
And thank you. And if you could just say your name too, please, in the museum you work at.
Bill Shishima, and I'm a volunteer at the Japanese American National Museum here in Los Angeles.
Oh, great. Thank you. And I can't wait to show this footage too to my class when I do my presentation at the end of the semester. But thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you.